Hey guys, today I want to take a look at Battlefield 2042 on the RTX 5090. With the upcoming release and multiplayer reveal of Battlefield 6, I figured it might be interesting to go back, take a look at the last Battlefield game that actually came out almost 5 years ago, back in 2021, put it against the 5090 and see how it fares. We have the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the 5090. We're playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers and pairing with a 9800 X3D as well as 64 gigabytes of DDR5. So this is essentially the top of the line setup that you could throw at a game today. So we'll see how Battlefield 2042 performs. So we'll be starting off here at 1080p. Now, this is of course an overpowered card for nearly any game that is 5 years old, but especially a game like a multiplayer shooter. So we're only going to be testing a few settings here. Starting off at 1080p, the only adjustment I'm going to make here is just sliding down our motion blur. Is actually very aggressive in this title. We're playing on max settings, but we are leaving our ray tracing off. It does offer ray trace ambient occlusion that will result for our ambient occlusion technology here. That will be grayed out when we apply the ray tracing, but for now, just going for max settings without the ray tracing. Now, I did do a little bit of testing. The ray tracing is well within this card's capabilities, even on competitive settings, but we'll see what it looks like here, just at max settings, 1080p without ray tracing. And we'll be playing in the Conquest 64 mode. So there is a 128 mode, and then there's some smaller modes as well. 64 Conquest is really what I personally associate with Battlefield, so this should be like, typical experience. I don't really think even adding more or few players will drastically affect our FPS, but this should give us a good idea of kind of baseline performance here. So starting off here, we'll go ahead and begin counting. Now, as you can see, we are getting pretty absurd FPS. I am actually somewhat surprised that we are not CPU bound in this instance, but it does seem that our CPU is, for the most part, keeping up, though our CPU utilization is awfully high here. Now, I will say, despite the fact that this game is almost 5 years old, it still looks really great. And I do think, this game got a lot of heat at the time of its release, and a lot of that is very, deserved, but I don't think really what you can, knock against this game is just how strong the visuals are. I mean, it's a really pretty looking game, especially the scale of the game. Definitely one of the cooler things and more unique things about the Battlefield series is just the scale of the battle, the number of players, how large the kind of combat environments are. Very impressive here. Getting right around 300 FPS, obviously incredibly strong FPS here, and way more than you would need. Our frame time graph is also relatively flat, 1% low, 150. It's a bit lower than I would probably want, but as far as just the actual experience playing here, it feels very smooth. So hopefully we can evade this. Oh, nope. Now this game, I think Battlefield 6 is reportedly going to feature the Frostbite engine, which is a bespoke engine that DICE created for their Battlefield games, and it's actually a really well-performing engine in my opinion. It seems to actually perform incredibly well. So there's a kind of funky little visual artifact there. That's kind of strange. But yeah, really solid performance here. Obviously, it's kind of tricky to tell whether or not we are in a place where we are CPU bound, because our GPU utilization is a bit lower than typically would be if we were in a strictly GPU bound scenario. Our CPU utilization is also pretty high, and our wattage for our GPU is also pretty low. Typically a 5090, when it's maxed out, it pulls around 500 watts. Right now we're pulling around 350, so it does seem to indicate that maybe we are in a situation where we are not actually fully utilizing that GPU. But regardless, looks and feels great here at 1080p max settings. Now the only thing we have left to do is throw on that ray tracing, but just kind of get a feel for it right around 300 FPS, maybe just a touch more, but really solid performance here, of course. And now with our ray tracing turned on, maybe get a bit of stutters here as we kind of compile our ray trace shaders, but you do see a slight drop in our FPS coming from 300 down to around 270 or so. Slight increase also in the amount of watts that we're pulling, but really, it's not full ray tracing. It's just that ambient occlusion that is using the ray tracing, so it's not super meaningful. In fact, there probably isn't a super great reason to test both settings here, but as you can see, still getting really solid FPS here, really solid performance, and the game looks great, runs great. But ray tracing does bring us down from around 300 FPS to right around 260 or so. But yeah, 1080p on this card, of course, you know, it's going to be well within its capabilities. Really no issues whatsoever here, as I definitely don't have the right gun for this particular engagement. But regardless, feels great, looks great. No surprise, 1080p knocks it out of the park. Now moving up to 1440p, this is with the ray tracing turned off again. And you see this is much more what, you know, you would typically see if you were in a GPU bound scenario, sitting right around like 99 and then pulling far more wattage. But obviously high resolution looks better, still well within, you know, playable territory, obviously above 200 FPS. Feels great. Still looks really great. Let's see if we can run around here. Maybe we can get a kill. Here's a guy right here. There, we got a kill there. Nice. I mean, one thing I will say about Battlefield is, yeah, there is like a lot going on, and I know the monetization practices for Battlefield 2042 were not super well received, but at the end of the day, just running around a big, you know, big battlefield like this, fighting a bunch of enemies, using all these different guns, the general look and feel of the game, I'm a fan of. I think it's a lot of fun. So, you know, despite the issues that the game had, I do think that overall, you know, still fun to jump in here and just shoot some guys. And this is a game that I bought a while back when the game was new and never really put a ton of time into for whatever reason. But coming back and playing it here definitely feels pretty solid. And the gunplay feels good. And, you know, if you've never played a Battlefield game on PC, you know, Battlefield on console, in my opinion, is just a super floaty experience as far as, like, the controls. On PC, it feels like way smoother. So, definitely a much better experience if you've never played on console, or if you've only ever played on console, never played on PC. I do think it's a pretty dramatic difference in just the general feel of the game. Now, as we turn on ray tracing here, you will see we do have DLSS. I'm not utilizing DLSS, though there probably is a good argument for using it. The only reason I'm not using it is just because our FPS is already so high. So while you could get a bit better, you know, FPS, use some DLSS, I don't really think it's super meaningful for this particular test. So now this is 1440p with that ray tracing on. And now we were getting around 250 FPS before, so drops us just about 50 FPS or so. It does seem to vary a bit. Like when we're zooming in, you see our FPS is pretty high. As soon as we zoom out, see more of like the environment, it kind of drops a little bit. But really, you know, the ray tracing, it's not like night and day difference as far as your actual experience. So not super surprising that it's also not really making a huge difference when it comes to our FPS. Just kind of seems to be a bit more like one of those games where, you know, the ray tracing is nice, but not necessarily like 100% needed all the time. Get my ass kicked here, so let's go. Let's try out our sniper rifle here, see if we can snipe some of these targets a little further away. There's one, nice. I will say Battlefield has some of the best sniping in video games, like the bullet drop, how far away enemies can be, how many different rules there are. Really feels really great pulling out a sniper in this game in some situations, as well as just the fact that even if you're not getting kills, you can still be useful by just kind of like targeting and spotting enemies. But anyways, as far as our average goes, as you can see, it's going to kind of get a bit wonky just because we are kind of going in and out of these loading screens, but it brings us around 200 FPS coming from 250 without the ray tracing here at 1440p. Still really happy with the performance here. You do see our wattage is increasing, so by about 100 or so. It does seem like, you know, no surprise, but, you know, higher resolution. Some ray tracing will increase the amount of power that the card has to pull in order to, you know, perform at its peak capabilities here. Now, coming in on our final resolution here, which is 4K. This is without the ray tracing, as we're kind of getting picked off here. And now you can see this is the spot where we are definitely pulling now at, you know, basically the 5090. When it's pulling that 500 watts, that's kind of when you know that it's pushing itself. So despite the fact that we are max settings without ray tracing so far, no ray tracing at this current moment, but you can see, you know, we are still in a spot where we're getting what I would consider to be competitive high FPS. I mean, no major issues here. I don't really feel the need to dump down our settings or anything like that. I'm, you know, more than happy with the kind of performance that we're getting. Definitely more than enough for someone like me to come in here and have some fun. Our 1% low here is a bit lower than I would probably like, right around 40. Doesn't really feel as choppy as that 1% low, and our frame time graph would kind of seem to indicate, as I'm very, very deep in enemy territory here. But definitely still, you know, really solid performance here at 4K. And of course, you know, the game looks good. We're playing on the same graphic settings, all maxed out pretty much, but game looks good pretty much regardless of settings, or as far as, you know, resolution goes. Now, I will say at max settings here, this is a game that, you know, really does operate at scale. So, you know, just looking at the world like this definitely is very impressive. But if you come up to like some textures, things like that, you know, actually it still looks pretty good, but obviously, you know, it's not going to look as good as like a, you know, more contained small single player or even like a smaller multiplayer experience. But definitely, you know, nothing to complain about here for me. Definitely really solid looking visuals here, and still getting, you know, despite, I guess the 1% lows are a bit disappointing, though. I will say, although 50 would definitely seem to indicate, as that did pretty much nothing there, 50 on our 1% lows would seem to indicate pretty choppy experience. It actually doesn't really feel like that. It still feels pretty solid. So around 50 on our 1% lows, 170 or so on our average. You know, if you had a 175 hertz screen here at 4K, not really sure what the most popular refresh rates are for 104 or for 4K, but you'd be populating it well. Now we're pulling, you know, 570, so definitely going to push your 5090 here in this situation. But we'll check out our last setting here, being that that ray trace setting, and see if that brings us a little more down to earth into a place where maybe we do need to implement a bit of DLSS, though I don't really expect that to be the case. All right, so for this last portion, I actually had to re-record this because there was some sort of issue. It's just a black screen, but we're now on 4K completely maxed out settings. So this is with ray traced ambient occlusion. See how that grays out our ambient occlusion option here. Playing it native. And I will say native here, there is TAA applied by default. You have the option of either going for high or low TAA, and this goes for all the previous tests as well. So I wish this you could disable completely. There may be some sort of console command or something like that. I know Battlefield is known to have those, where you can come in and disable that, just because you don't really need TAA at native resolution when you're at 4K at least. So anyways, let's hop in. This is now 4K, completely maxed everything out. All right, so loading in here, we'll go ahead and begin counting. And just like before, you know, one thing I will say is our 1% lows are not quite where I'd want them to be. They're not terrible by any means. They're around 90 right now. In my previous test that the recording didn't actually pull through, they dropped down to like 50 at times. We are still getting like definitely a competitive FPS right around 170, and this is now with ray traced ambient occlusion. So there are some ray tracing effects going on, of course. Now, you know, these cards like the 50 series, they're much better at ray tracing than I think in 2021 the 30 series was the current generation of NVIDIA GPUs. So certainly come a long way, but as you can see, you know, still getting really solid performance, only using about 11.5 gigabytes of video memory. I will say, you know, one thing that this game really proves to me, I will say we are getting this weird like box on our screen. I noticed in the previous testing too. I'll zoom in on that. I don't know what that is. That's some sort of like weird effect. I'm not sure what that is. But anyways, one thing that I will say I notice from doing this test is that this game looks phenomenal. You know, it's a really good looking game. And by today's standards, it performs incredibly well. And I wish, can I revive this guy? Oh, I can. I really wish that, you know, games today could look this good and perform this good. It seems that something happened in the last like 3 or 4 years where games are just much more poorly optimized. You know, a game that looks this good nowadays, you know, like we'd be looking at maybe 120 FPS with some DLSS, even on a 5090. So, you know, that's definitely one thing that I, you know, am noticing. Is just obviously that's conjecture, you know, like we'll see how the next Battlefield performs, but you know, this looks incredible, and because, you know, it was made for older GPUs, and this obviously this generation and this particular GPU were definitely not out at the time of this game's release. It was, you know, having to be made to play on much weaker hardware. So loading in with more advanced hardware like this, you know, we're able to play native 4K and get well beyond a competitive FPS. I mean, in my mind, 120 is competitive FPS. Anything beyond that is really just like, you know, it's just extra, really. It's not going to meaningfully change your experience, like 120 versus, 170 is not like a super drastically different experience or anything like that. But yeah, definitely really solid performance here. We haven't used any DLSS whatsoever, and honestly, there's not really a huge need for it. I will say, because we have forced TAA in this game, there might be a case for, just using DLSS at quality, just due to the fact that you'll get, a slight performance increase, as well as, you'd likely get maybe even better anti-aliasing or cleaner looking anti-aliasing. TAA has a tendency, it's less noticeable at higher resolutions, but it does have a tendency to kind of make things just look a bit softer. That's kind of how it, gets rid of these like sharp edges, like on phone, like these like phone lines and things like that, without any sort of anti-aliasing. Oftentimes that may look not great, but here, kind of just blurs it. There's still like a little bit of flickering going on, but yeah, definitely not too bad here whatsoever at around 160 FPS on our average. Now I will, even though I don't really need to, it's not necessary in my opinion, I will throw on just quality DLSS just to see kind of what sort of performance increase we can get, and then if there is a super noticeable, improvement to our FPS. So just putting on here quality DLSS. Now go ahead and begin counting. We were getting 165 on our average. I will say the actual like picture quality, in my opinion, looks pretty much the same. I'm not noticing a major difference here. So getting right around, is there no self-heal? Right around 200 FPS, so like a 40 FPS increase. Again, there's definitely diminishing returns when it comes to FPS when we're already operating from pretty high FPS, but definitely nice to see that, again, I'm not sure what model of DLSS this actually uses. I have to imagine that it's, that it is a bit of an older model. I'm, certain it's a CNN model, probably even, an older CNN model. And, I didn't look into it, but you may be able to inject it. I don't know how many people really would care that much too, but you may be able to inject like the transformer model here to get, a bit cleaner or sharper of an image. But, definitely, there's not really good reason not to use DLSS just because it looks essentially native, maybe even better. I would have to do some pixel peeping. It's not super obvious that it looks way better. But overall, definitely, happy with the performance here. Now, Battlefield 6, I will say, I'll take a moment to just kind of say, Battlefield 6, as I'm recording it, this video, it's the night before the multiplayer review. It's July 30th right now. So the multiplayer reveal is tomorrow, and they'll be giving away, there's two betas. There's a closed beta and an open beta. So the closed beta is like Twitch drops for streamers, content creators, and those streams, and so I'm gonna try to get into the closed beta to give you guys some videos early, and then as far as the open beta, which I believe takes place just a few days later, so if I don't get into closed beta, it's not a huge issue for me, and I'm sure there will be, obviously. I'm sure there will be plenty of videos out there, but I do want to mention, if you've made it this far and have been enjoying this video, and maybe you're a subscriber here and you've enjoyed some of my other videos, I've been kind of slowing down on the uploads, and that's not because I am, losing steam as far as like my desire to upload or anything like that. I really do enjoy making these videos, and I've said in another video, I kind of do this anyways. Even before I started making videos, I would kind of just throw in different GPUs and kind of just see like what the performance is. So I have no intention of stopping making videos, but really there just hasn't really been any super interesting high profile PC releases that are, worth benchmarking, in my opinion, as well as not really any super interesting or exciting hardware releases recently. The 9060 XT came out, 9070, obviously the 50 series cards. Probably the next big cards will maybe be the supers, but of course, the super series of cards are a bit less popular than the main, series version that has all the new features. So even that, I'm not sure that will be super exciting, but we do have some pretty large releases coming up soon. So just don't want to just put out videos just to put out videos. And, in my experience, like what I prefer as someone who, I consume videos like this too all the time, is I prefer to actually, follow channels that put out videos when videos need to be put out, which is what I'm doing here. I thought it would be interesting to just take a look at the last Battlefield, see how it runs, and then, as we get into Battlefield 6, see how it looks and runs in comparison, especially on, you know, higher end hardware like the 5090. So that's kind of the main reason why I've been, you can call it like a little bit slowing down on the, you know, the upload speed, is just because I don't want to just dump out videos just to dump them out. But when a release comes out or hardware comes out that, you know, is worth making videos on, I will be there to make videos, and I, you know, still love doing it, so I'll definitely be doing it. And honestly, the uploads haven't slowed that much. I just, you know, I've been doing it like weekly as opposed to twice a week, which is my old cadence. So I will certainly go back to a more consistent and strong cadence once there are some releases. But if you're here, you're a subscriber, or even if you just stumbled across this video because you're curious about the performance, I really appreciate you guys checking out the videos, and I'm excited to check out Battlefield 6. Definitely going to be checking out the beta, either the closed or open beta, whichever one I am able to get into. So I really appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.